Ah, the basement dweller, a figure so quintessentially tragic yet unintentionally comical, is practically the digital love child of a Dickensian miser and a Monty Python sketch gone terribly wrong. Picture, if you will, this poor sod entombed in his subterranean lair, his pallid face bathed in the unholy glow of multiple screens, like a moth to a flame, but with far less purpose. Surrounded by a graveyard of half-eaten snacks and the pungent aroma of failure, he taps away at his keyboard as though composing the next great literary masterpiece, except, of course, it's more akin to a toddler's scrawl on a toilet wall. Let us examine his work, shall we? These, artistic composites he so proudly parades around the internet, as though he's some avant-garde provocateur destined for a Turner Prize. Sadly, his creations are about as artistic as a splattered ketchup stain on a pub menu lacking in both substance and style. His attempts at Photoshop wizardry could be outdone by a tipsy granny with a glue stick and some old magazines. And yet, in his delusional grandeur, he fancies himself a master of satire, when in truth his work evokes little more than a bemused chuckle and the urgent desire to avert one's eyes. But, oh, the drama! This internet knight-errant fancies himself in a battle of wits, brandishing his keyboard like a rusty sword, ready to smite his enemies with. Memes and misspellings. His attempts at provocation are as effective as a rubber sword in a joust, a lot of flailing. Not much hitting. One can almost hear the dramatic orchestral score in his head as he imagines himself cutting down his foes with his razor-sharp insights, while the rest of us observe his antics with the same bemusement one might reserve for a squirrel trying to operate a blender. Then there's his racial superiority complex, an absolute riot of ignorance. If there were a university for bigotry, this chap would graduate with a first-class degree, though perhaps his dissertation would be little more than incoherent babble stitched together with misplaced self-righteousness. Imagine a man so lacking in self-awareness that he believes spouting outdated drivel makes him some kind of enlightened philosopher king. In reality, he's more like the village idiot who stumbled into the throne room by accident and now believes he's ruling the kingdom. His intellectual insights on race are about as profound as a pub board droning on after one too many pints, uninformed, unwanted, and entirely laughable. Ah, and his piece de resistance, the monkey avatar. A masterstroke of self-sabotage if ever there was one. One can only imagine the thought process. Yes, this monkey will show them I mean business in his mind. It's a symbol of cheeky irreverence, a digital middle finger to the world. But to the rest of us, it's the perfect representation of his intellectual prowess, a creature known for flinging its own excrement, and not much else. It's a badge of honour he wears with misplaced pride, blissfully unaware that it serves as the perfect encapsulation of his entire digital existence. Our dear basement dweller seems to think he's a rebellion outlaw roaming the lawless plains of the internet, dispensing his own brand of justice. In truth, he's more like that odd bloke in the village square shouting at pigeons, convinced they're plotting against him. His entire worldview is like a half-baked conspiracy theory wrapped in a tinfoil hat, 1 part paranoia, 2 parts pure nonsense, with a generous dollop of delusion on top. He fancies himself a warrior of wit, yet his jabs land with all the force of a wet sponge. Like a pigeon puffing out its chest and strutting about as if it owns the part, our troll's bravado is wildly disproportionate to his actual abilities. His attempts at humour are akin to a custard pie thrown into the wind, more likely to hit him in the face than anyone else. Yet there he sits, day after day, convinced that his keyboard is mightier than the sword, all while the rest of us are left to enjoy the absurd spectacle of a man tilting at windmills in his underpants. In the grand theatre of the internet, our basement dweller plays the role of the jester, but he lacks the self-awareness to realise it. His every post, his every rant, his every laughable attempt at mockery is a performance in the most tragicomic of ways. He's the star of his own self-produced farce, and while the audience may be small, their laughter is genuine. So let us not be too harsh on him, for in his misguided attempts at relevance, he brings us to one thing he can't seem to grasp: joy. Yes, the joy of watching someone so blissfully unaware of their own absurdity that they become a walking satire, a monument to the limits of human folly. Bravo, basement dweller, bravo! May you continue to unknowingly entertain us with your crayon-level artistry, your monkey-mind philosophy, and your misplaced sense of grandeur. The world needs its jesters, and you, my dear fellow, are one for the ages. Ah, but we mustn't leave out the epic saga of his social skills, or rather, the distinct lack thereof. Our basement dweller has all the charm of a mouldy crumpet left festering in the corner of a damp cupboard. When he does venture out from his digital dungeon to interact with others, typically on forums where intellectual discourse goes to die, he's like an ill-trained dog bounding into a posh garden party, knocking over tables and drooling on the canapes. He fancies himself a conversational gladiator, prepared to verbally eviscerate anyone who dares cross his path. But in reality, his contributions are the social equivalent of farting in a lift crude, unwelcome, and lingering far longer than anyone would like. His attempts at humour are another tragic marvel. You see, he's convinced he's a comic genius and internet Oscar Wilde, tossing out barbed witticisms with the deftness of a fencing master, yet his jokes have all the subtlety of a brick through a stained glass window. Think of a man who believes he's performing stand-up at the Apollo when in fact he's telling knock jokes at a toddler's birthday party, and even the toddlers aren't impressed. Every punchline he delivers lands with the grace of a fridge falling down a flight of stairs, and the only thing being injured is his own dignity, not that he'd noticed, bless him. And oh, the drama. If there's one thing our basement dweller loves more than a good keyboard war, it's a crisis of his own making. Whether he's been banned from yet another forum for telling it like it is Reed being a colossal prat, or he's embroiled in a scandal. Over one of his Photoshop monstrosities, he carries on as if he's the tragic hero in a Shakespearean play. His life is a series of imagined slights, each one more dramatic than the last, each requiring a public declaration of how terribly misunderstood he is. He's the internet's equivalent of those Victorian fainting ladies, forever clutching his metaphorical pearls and swooning at the sheer injustice of it all. What's particularly delicious about his sense of persecution is that he genuinely believes the world is out to get him. Oh yes, to our dear troll, every account suspension, every social media block, every withering retort from someone with an ounce of common sense is evidence of a grand conspiracy. He imagines himself a digital Galileo, punished for daring to speak truths that the plebeians simply cannot handle. In reality, he's more like a bloke yelling at a park bench for not appreciating his poetry, utterly irrelevant, but oh, so convinced of his own significance. But we mustn't forget his valiant attempts at romance. Surely the cherry atop this tragicomic cake. Yes, our basement dweller fancies himself a bit of a Casanova. Armed with his favourite weapons, misogyny thinly veiled as banter, and a profile photo of him squinting into a webcam, he ventures forth into the wild world of online dating. His chat-up lines are the stuff of legend, combining all the smoothness of sandpaper with the charm of a soggy biscuit. His opening gambits tend to revolve around the theme of how women are lucky to even be talking to him, which, as you might imagine, goes down about as well as a lead balloon. One can almost hear the collective sound of women across the internet rolling their eyes in unison. In his mind, he's a misunderstood romantic hero, think Mr. Darcy, but with fewer manners and a keyboard coated in Dorito dust. He fancies that his brutal honesty will be refreshing, when in reality it's about as refreshing as a cup of cold sick. His love life is unsurprisingly a barren wasteland, punctuated only by the occasional rejection, which he naturally attributes to women being shallow or unable to handle the truth. You see, in his world it's never his fault. No, the problem is always society, or political correctness, or the fact that women just don't appreciate a good bloke anymore. It's a sad little echo chamber he lives in, where every failure is someone else's doing, and every triumph is just around the corner, if only the world would wake up and see his genius. In conclusion, our basement dweller is an endless well of comedic gold, a character so utterly deluded and oblivious that he practically writes his own satire. He's the tragic hero of his own epic, battling imaginary foes, creating art that no one wants, and delivering speeches that fall on deaf ears. Yet in his own mind he's a legend, a revolutionary, a misunderstood genius just waiting for his moment in the sun. So let us celebrate this internet enigma, this keyboard crusader, this digital Don Quixote. His life may be spent in the shadowy corners of the web, but he provides the rest of us with a shining beacon of laughter. After all, in the great comedy of life, we all need a fool to remind us of just how absurd things can get. And who better to play that role than our dear, beloved basement dweller? Bravo, you magnificent misguided fool.